Hello friends, welcome to the Cold War Prepper, and this is Lee. I was asked by a friend to, well actually a subscriber, to give my opinion about the things that are going on in the world today. And even though I have 21 years experience as an intelligence collector, intelligence analyst, and reporter, I don't like doing that because people don't take the time sometimes to investigate historical things and put them into perspective and say, you know, what's really happening and how long has this been happening and what are some of the root causes. I can give you all kinds of examples. I just watched a video the other day. This guy, I'm sure he thought he was doing the right thing. He went over to a Catholic church and bent over this stone. He says, they've rewritten the 10 Commandments. Look, they've got the 10 Commandments wrong. This one, it's because they worship idols and they don't want to have a commandment of thou shalt not worship idols. And gosh, just a little bit of research, he would have found out a couple things, okay? So, number one, he would have found out that there are 14 thou shalt nots in Genesis and Exodus, not just 10. So how they are divided has been for a long time. Now then, in about 425 AD, the Bible was canonized by the Catholics, not by the Protestants. Protestants didn't exist until around 1517, so everything was Catholic up until that time. Then the other thing is we didn't have divisions in the Bible. They were just letters. So when the Bible was first written, it was just letters from Paul to the Thessalonians, or a letter from Peter, or a letter from John, or whatever. It was in the 12th century that we divided them into chapters. And then finally in 1551, Robert Estienne, who is also called Stephanus, began breaking down the chapters into verses. So we didn't even have verses until 1551, and that was in the Greek New Testament. Now, in 1559 or 1557, they came out with what was called the Geneva Bible, and that was the first time that the whole Bible was broken up into chapters and verses. It was also the first English translation. And because it was kind of not that kind towards humanly kings, King James would later have it retranslated so that it was a little bit more understanding of his position as a monarch and less like what the Geneva Bible had. Oh, by the way, the Geneva Bible is the one that the Pilgrims had on them when they came to the United States and landed. And so that's probably one of the oldest Bibles here in the U.S. I would encourage you, do some research, you know, find out about things like, you know, where the divisions are among the 10 Commandments. Until 1517, the stone this guy thought had been rewritten. That's the way they were interpreted. It was in 1517, after Martin Luther broke from the church, that the Protestants redid the 10 Commandments to suit their ideological goals, not necessarily those that were the way they were. So because you can get into things like that, when you expose the truth to people, they get extremely defensive, they get extremely agitated. You don't want to do that to too many people. I want to help people survive what's coming, rather than divide people by telling them truths or anything like that, or having them just look at history and take a look at what's going on around you, and has it happened before, and maybe why. And so we can see things. So what I wanted to do is I want to take a historical perspective of what's going on in the Middle East right now. I have long said that it's a powder keg. It's going to blow. It's going to blow intently. I do believe that it is the area that's talked about in biblical, in scriptures, that's going to be where we're going to see the end of the world come from. Is this it today? Are we seeing the beginnings of that? I think we've seen the beginnings of that since about 1500 BCE, or I say BC, but I guess the politically correct thing to say is BCE. You know, it's been a powder keg, and there's been constant fighting going on for almost 3,500 years. So, you know, when is it going to blow up to be the ultimate battle? I don't know. I don't think anybody does. as Jesus told us that the time will come like a thief in the night, and no one knows the hour nor the day. So let's take a look at the historical perspective of what's been going on there in the Middle East for the last 3,500 years. So we call that area generically the Levant, Levant, and that just means the area east of the Mediterranean Sea. It also includes Cyprus, by the way. So it's the area east of the Mediterranean Sea. Basically, the Arab countries, we can call Israel part of that, all the way as far east as the Tigris and Euphrates rivers and the Gulf of Persia. Once we get into that area beyond, we're getting into Persia and places like that. So the Levant, and it also includes the Sinai Desert. So it's basically what we today call the Middle East. So if you consider Middle East being a geographical term and Levant being a geographical term, you got it made. The earliest mention of the country I'm going to say the Israelites, the people, is in 1213 in the Merneptah stone, or stela. Stela means stone. And so that's where they first mentioned the Israelites in 1213 BC. And then around 1500, we think that's when the Israelites actually were formed. So the first of the Israelites was a guy by the name of Abram, and he married a woman named Sarah. Now, but before that, he was the son of Terach, Terah, and Terach is the 9th generation after Noah. He's a direct descendant of Noah. And Abram, at that time, before his name was changed to Abraham, is also the uncle of Lot, of Sodom and Gomorrah fame. So he was originally from Ur in Canaan, and he married Sarah, who didn't give him a son. So Sarah gave him her slave, who was probably very capable of producing a son, and he did. And so as a result of that union, they had a son named Ishmael. Now, when Ishmael was about 14 years old, Sarah finally conceived and gave birth to a son named Isaac, and that son then became the son of Abram as well. So Abram now has two children, Ishmael, who is 14 years older, and Isaac the younger. Well, Sarah is now concerned that because Ishmael is the older son, and he's going to get the inheritance of the name and the lands and the title and everything else. So she wants to drive Hagar, the slave mother of Ishmael, and Ishmael out of the camp. So she successfully does that, and she pushes them away. So now Isaac is the only son of Abram there to inherit everything. Well, as Ishmael and Hagar are leaving, an angel appears to them. And so this is in Genesis 21, verses 9 through 13. An angel of God appears to Hagar and says that Ishmael will be a wild ass of a man. His hand shall be against every man, and every man's hand will be against him. And he shall dwell in the face of his brethren. So now we have these two half-brothers, Isaac and Ishmael. Okay, and that's going to be the population center or the focus of the populations to come from there on in the area. So Isaac, of course, is the one who's altered on the altar of God, offered as a sacrifice on the altar of God by Abram. As a result, God changed his name to Abraham and says that he and his family, and the same thing with Ishmael. Ishmael's family will have lands beyond the scope of the earth. And so, however, due to Abraham's obedience to God in sacrificing Isaac, he's given the land of the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Cadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaim, the Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites, and the Jebusites. And at this time, Isaac also becomes the covenant. And so he is the first of the, quote, circumcised Jews, that sign of the covenant. Well, Isaac, of course, has 12 sons. And we know those now as the 12 tribes of Israel. And later, as a result, Joseph goes off and gets sold into bondage into Israel. He becomes basically the Al-Hadith, or the prime minister, if you will, of the Pharaoh in Egypt, and he controls everything. He has the keys to the kingdom, Al-Hadith. Now that's going to become important because in Matthew 16:18, Jesus makes Peter the al-Khadif, or the prime minister of his kingdom on earth, the keys to the kingdom. So anyhow, Joseph and then his 11 brothers come to him as a result of the famine in Israel, and they bring his father and his brothers, and they all come live with Joseph in Egypt. Well, it's almost as bad in Egypt, but they have laid up food. So they end up trading away everything for more food, and finally trading away themselves as slaves to Pharaoh in exchange for food to survive. And it stays that way up until around 1391 to 1271, somewhere in that vicinity. We have this character named Moses, and Moses is born in Egypt, raises up, finds out that he is actually a descendant of the Jews, and so he leads an uprising of the 12 tribes of the Israelites against Egypt. They come across, of course, the parting of the sea and everything else, the 40 years wandering in the desert, which is basically the Sinai Peninsula. Now, if you do a study today, it should take you about 12 days to walk from the Red Sea into Israel through, that corridor there to include Gaza. And but for some reason, they had to travel the land of the Sinai Peninsula for 40 years. And I believe, my personal belief is that they had to have all the people who lived under slavery, those who thought like slaves, had to die off, that entire generation, before they were allowed to enter into Israel as a free and whole people. So somewhere towards the end, around 1270-ish, Joshua, of course, Moses is out of it, Aaron's out of it. Joshua is the new leader of the Israelites, and he leads them across the Jordan River into what becomes Israel. Two tribes decide that they don't want to cross over the Jordan into present-day Israel, and they stay on the east side of the River Jordan. We lose track of them in history from that point on. Do they unify with the descendants of Ishmael? We don't know. But all we do know is that those two tribes are kind of out of the question. Then around 1020, so somewhere between 1000, 1020 and 1000 BCE, Saul becomes the first king of Israel. Then he, of course, dies, and he is succeeded by Ishbosheth, better known as Isbaal, who is recognized as the second king of Israel. But simultaneous with that, we had another person who wanted to be who was anointed king of Israel. So we had two kings of Israel at the same time for a short while. We had Ishbosheth from 10 to 991, and then from 1000 to 962, we had David, who is recognized as the third king of Israel. And he established Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. This is somewhere around 970, 980, before the Common Era, or before Christ, whichever way you want to look at it. So Jerusalem was the capital of Israel almost 1,000 years before what we consider to be the transition over to the Christian era, or the Common Era. So that's almost 3,000 years ago that Jerusalem was proclaimed the capital of Israel. Then Solomon becomes the king in succession of his father David, and he was the fourth king of Israel between 962 and 922 BCE. Now he is the son of David and Bathsheba. Interesting, when you look this up in the Bible, when Bathsheba, one of 300 of David's wives and concubines, wants to talk to David, she has to request an audience. And however, when Bathsheba wants to talk with Solomon, she doesn't have to request an audience. And he has the same thing. He has 300 concubines and wives. So who is the queen of Egypt? Well, it's not the wife of the king. It's the mother of the king. That's another one of those biblical things that's going to come over into the Christian era. And we say, who is the queen of heaven? Well, it's the mother of the king, the mother of Jesus. And so that's why there is some veneration of Mary as being not only the new Ark of the Covenants, because she had to be pure to have Jesus inside of her for 9 months, but also she's the mother of Jesus, the King, who has come, the Messiah. So therefore, in old Jewish traditions, she becomes the queen of heaven and earth. Finally, in 992 to 915, Rehoboam, who is the son of Solomon, becomes the fifth and final king of the united Israel. So Israel then divides into two parts. The top part has about 7 tribes, and that becomes what we call Israel, or it's also called Samaria. Remember the Good Samaritan in the Bible. The southern part has 2 tribes, so that's Judah and Benjamin become the country of Judah. So from that point on, we have 2 different kingdoms: the northern kingdom, Israel; the southern kingdom, Judah. Now, you do quick math. You say, Lee, there's 7 tribes up north, 2 tribes down at the bottom, and there's 2 tribes that were lost on the eastern side of the Jordan because they didn't cross over. Who is the 12th tribe? Well, the 12th tribe is the tribe of Levi, the priests. And so the tribe of Levi were scattered among all the other tribes because they were the ones who gave the adorations and the praises and everything else. But they also staffed the temple, and so they were the 12th tribe, the tribe of Levi, who was in both. So then Jeroboam the first becomes the first king of the northern kingdom, and from that time on, Israel is split into basically Israel and Judah. Judah being where Jerusalem is, by the way, and Bethlehem. Samaria, or Israel, being where Nazareth is. So a lot of things going on here. Finally, about 772 BCE, the Assyrians under Sargon II conquer and occupy Israel, and the last king of Israel, so this is the northern half, was Zedekiah. Around 586 BCE, the Babylonians occupy or conquer the Assyrians. They take over the northern Israel as well as the southern Judah. And it's at this time that the first temple is destroyed. So now the Jews are without a temple. Okay, that's the one that Solomon built. Okay. Now in 538 BCE, both the Assyrians and the Babylonians are conquered by Cyrus the Great of Persia. And so now he creates kind of a mini diaspora, if you will, and the Jews are spread out. But Cyrus has a vision. He allows the Jews to return back home. And somewhere shortly after 538 BCE, Cyrus the Great allows the rebuilding of the temple or the building of the second temple. Probably not at the exact same spot that the first temple was. Then around 332 BCE, Alexander the Great, I'm sure you remember him, conquers the greater part of the Levant, as well as all the way in the North Africa, all of Egypt. And when he dies, he divides his kingdom up among 4 of his generals, and their descendants become the leaders of those different countries. So when we have Cleopatra, about 300 years later, Cleopatra was not Egyptian. She was a great-great-granddaughter of one of Alexander the Great's generals, and she was the ruler of Egypt, which is why there was that infatuation between the Romans and the Greek Egyptians. And so that's why Cleopatra was who she was. So then about 165 BCE, the Maccabeans, and this is one of the 6 books of the Apocrypha that are banned. They were banned in 100 AD, well, they weren't, banned is the wrong word, weren't included in the canonization of the Jewish Bible in 100 AD because they were all written in Greek. Well, the reason is because whenever Alexander the Great took over a country, he demanded that all legal documents, all writings, all education, all language be in Greek. That's why during the time of Jesus, coin, or Greek, was the language of trade, the language of commerce, and everything else. So most people spoke Koine Greek at that time, and that was what we believe most of the original transcripts were written in as far as the New Testament. So that's the way that was. The Maccabean revolt happened around 165 BCE. Because of the Maccabean revolt, we have a couple of Jewish holidays that are in the book of the Maccabees and the others around this time. And one of those holidays is Hanukkah. So by throwing out the Apocrypha, we no longer have any biblical source for Hanukkah to happen as a Jewish holiday. But anyhow, so that's the way that was up until, and they were a separate kingdom now, and that kingdom was called the Hasmonean Kingdom, and that kingdom survived until around 66 BCE. 64 BCE, when Rome conquered Judea and Israel and kicked the Greeks out and made it a vassal state. Then, finally, in 6 BCE, they recognized the king of Egypt, kingdom of Israel, and all that kinds of stuff. And we also had, and so this is the kingdom of Herod, and that also changed the status of Israel from being a vassal state to being a province of Rome. So everything was pretty much good to go until around 66 AD, or Common Era, and we had from 66 AD until 136 AD or CE, the Jewish insurrection against Rome. And it was about, at the end of this, about 136 AD, that the second temple was destroyed, thrown down, and everything else. And that was done by Emperor Hadrian. You know him, Hadrian's Wall in England. And so he's the one who basically tore down the temple and then said, okay, all you Jews out of here. And he kicked out all the Jews. And that began what is called the diaspora, or the great expulsion of the Jews to all over the rest of the world. So there was no unified Jewish kingdom. So at that time, Hadrian also changed the name from Israel and Judea, and then of course you had Syria up to the northeast, and so he just changed the name to Palestina, Syria. And so that's where we get the name Palestine and Syria from, was from this division by the Roman Emperor Hadrian sometime in the 2nd century AD. Well, then we have this guy come into the scene by the name of Muhammad, and he starts a new religion called Islam. And so that begins in Mecca, Medina, there in the Levant, and spreads westward. So then we have, beginning in 634 to 638, the Muslim conquest of the Levant. And at that time, there were probably somewhere around 50 to 160 Jewish enclaves, towns, kibbutzes, whatever you want to call them, around the Levant area. And probably 15% of that area we currently call Israel was occupied by Jews. So from 614 until 634, or 634 to 638, we had that army invading and taking over and forcing everybody to convert to Islam by the sword. And then in 638, we had the final conquering and occupation of Jerusalem. So now Jerusalem becomes under the Muslim rule. Well, remember, we've got this other thing happening now between 33 AD and up until 638 AD, and that's called the Christians. And so the Christians had been in Jerusalem. Of course, they consider that their holy city as well. So when the Muslims took over Jerusalem 638, that started this big conquest between the Christians and the Muslims between 638 and 1291, and we had several crusades. So the first crusade in 1099 took Jerusalem back from the Muslims, and they established what was called the Kingdom of Jerusalem, and this was a Christian kingdom. And there aren't that many Jews left in Jerusalem at this time. It's primarily Christians and Muslims. So the Christian Kingdom of Jerusalem lasted about 200 years, from 1099 until 1291. And in 1291, the Christians were all kicked out of the area, basically, and that was the final battle, the Battle of Acre, and that's where the Knights, the Templars, the Hospitallers, and the Teutonics were basically kicked out of the Middle East. So from that point on, it became an Arabic Muslim empire. Now that became formalized in 1517 with the formation of the Ottoman Empire. So the Ottoman Empire occupied the area we now call Israel from 1517 up until 1917, so about 400 years. And in 1917, the British kicked as a result of World War I, the Ottoman Empire no longer existed. The British took over control, and the British owned all that area, Syria, well, the Levant, from 1917 until around 1948, when we had the UN Declaration that allowed the creation of the country of Israel. So, and you know, ever since then, everybody's been complaining, that's our land, not theirs, and everything, and people are fighting. Well, what we've got is we've got two long-lost cousins, okay? We've got the descendants of Ishmael, the Muslims, the descendants of Isaac, and this is a family feud, if you will. But the interesting thing is we even have, within that, we have other family feuds. So within Islam, we have the Sunnis and the Shias, and they have their divisions, which are kind of crazy. So, the Sunnis, which are about 90 to 95% of the population of the Arab world. It's also the largest religion in the world, Sunni Muslims. And but their main thing is, after Muhammad died, he did not appoint a successor, so they have a person who was in charge of him, and that was the Caliph, or you might have known it as a Caliphate. That was headquartered in the Ottoman Empire in Turkey until the end of World War I, and then the Caliphate was done away with. Now, of course, the Shia, which are primarily Persia and Iraq area, they believe that when Muhammad died, he appointed his son-in-law / cousin as his successor, and that's the Imam. And so he is the successor and true leader of Islam. So as long as there aren't Christians or Jews around, the Sunnis and the Shia are like this, okay? But if you throw a Jew or you throw a Christian into the mix, then they unify to fight against the infidel, the outsider. So that's where we are. We've got the descendants of Persia, Iran, and Iraq, the Shia, okay, who want to get rid of the infidel, U.S. and Jews, Israel, as well as the Sunnis, who want to get rid of the infidels. And we've got this land since 1948 called Israel, right there smack dab in the middle of it. But let's go back to Genesis and let's close. Where do I stand on this? Let's close with the story between Ishmael and Isaac, which is recorded in Genesis. And so it says that that Ishmael would be a wild ass of a man. His hand will be against every man, and every man's hand will be against him. And he shall dwell in the face of his brethren. So it was foretold in Genesis that, these two are going to have conflict, that they're going to be face to face, they're going to try to coexist, and it won't be possible. So is this prophetic? Are we looking at the end? I don't know. All I can say is let's pray for peace. Because every human life out there, whether it be Jewish, whether it be Christian, whether it be Muslim, is a creation of God, deserves dignity, respect, and the right to life. So all I can ask is, please pray for peace. Pray for the salvation of all those souls in whatever way we can have them saved. And make sure that no more children or women have to suffer as a result of the disagreement that was begun with Ishmael and Isaac. So remember, we're all in this together so we can come out the other side together. Please be kind, polite, and respectful to each other, because togetherness is the key, not division. Take care. Bye-bye.